so thankful that you're all here for the launch and to read the indictment. It's just great to see so many of you.
And I'm Jim Trengrove, and yes, we're married.
Yep.
And welcome to this Partners for Democracy special event, the first of the year. Just a little bit about us. We formed back in the summer of 2020. We provide support for candidates, organizations, causes related to our common goals. We mobilize to fight voter suppression, to get out the vote, and to help those who previously have not been engaged in the political process.
So here's the scenario that we face in the election year ahead. We have a former president of the United States on trial for his efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election, crimes that could put him in prison. And he's running again for president.
And so that's why when Special Prosecutor Jack Smith in August announced the indictment against Donald Trump, he invited all Americans to read the indictment to understand the gravity of the charges against him, and we did.
Yes, we did. We actually took turns reading the indictment, 45 pages of it, out loud to each other in bed.
Yeah. And what we found out is that the January 6th insurrection is just a small part of the grand jury's indictment. Most of it is about emails and tweets and phone calls and threats and hastily arranged meetings and with lawyers and advisors, creating strategies, trying anything to keep Donald Trump in office.
And so 1 hour and 45 minutes later, we turned to each other and we were just so impressed by the storytelling of the written indictment. And somehow more so than the drip, drip, drip of news, which we are both news junkies, but having it filtered is different from the feeling of empowerment that we had with a much clearer understanding of what the charges were against Donald Trump. We also realized that very few Americans are going to take the time to read the indictment. And so we thought about how to make the indictment more accessible to all Americans.
So we turned the indictment into a script and produced a video of ordinary Americans, young and old, different faces, different voices, reading the entire criminal indictment to camera.
And 83 in all, and you'll recognize a few of the readers. 9 of them are here with us tonight. And joining us also includes Robert Siegel, who is one of the readers, former NPR host of All Things Considered, and he's here to moderate the discussion. So take it away, Robert.
Jim, Roberta, thank you very much. And thanks for the invitation, not just to moderate, but to be one of the 83 readers of the indictment. I think that the extent to which there's public discussion of this indictment, it tends to run along political lines. I think a lot of people make a judgment about the case based on whom they vote for, what cable channel they look at. The actual substance of the indictment, which we may have read about or heard about when it was first unveiled, has been for many of us consigned to the mental archives. So I think it's a terrific idea to put the actual document out there and to encourage people to read it or to watch people reading it or listen to people reading it. The allegations it makes are very serious. They're very rich in detail. Of course, it's only an indictment. The special prosecutor has not yet put it to a jury. Donald Trump has not yet mounted a defense. But I think that when that time comes, we'll all understand what's being argued in that courtroom a lot better if we listen first to this very nicely produced reading. Back to you guys.
Oh, all right, well, we'll get right back to you, Robert. First of all, just a couple of housekeeping things. This event is being recorded. We'll have the link available to share tomorrow. If you have questions, we hope to get to some of them. You can put them in the chat. And the completed Read the Indictment video, 1 hour and 48 minutes and 24 seconds, will be available on our website immediately following this event.
And the video will also be broken down into 15 digestible episodes so that no one feels that they have to watch the whole thing at once. They can watch it when they have time. I have to say, watching the whole thing is pretty riveting, though. So here is the 6-minute sample of the project.
In the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, United States of America versus Donald J. Trump, defendant.
Count 1, conspiracy to defraud the United States.
So for more than 2 months following Election Day on November 3rd, 2020, Trump spread lies that there had been outcome determinative fraud in the election and that he had actually won. These claims were false, and Trump knew they were false.
The defendant, Donald J. Trump, did knowingly combined, conspire, confederate,
by using knowingly false claims of election fraud to obstruct the federal government function by which those results are collected, counted, and certified.
When that failed, on the morning of January 6th, Trump and co-conspirators repeated knowingly false claims of election fraud to gathered supporters.
Trump said there had been a suspicious vote dump in Detroit, Michigan. Trump's attorney general had explained to Trump that this was false.
Co-conspirator 3 responded 9 minutes later, writing, in all caps, "It must go in all suits in Georgia and Pennsylvania immediately with a fraud claim that requires the entire election to be set aside in those states and machines impounded for nonpartisan professional inspection."
The senior campaign advisor wrote in an email, "I'll obviously hustle to help on all fronts, but it's tough to own any of this when it's all just conspiracy shit beamed down from the mothership."
Trump claimed that 5,000 dead people voted in Georgia, causing the Georgia Secretary of State to respond, "Well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong. The actual number were two people that were dead that voted."
Trump made a knowingly false statement in Michigan. At 6:31 in the morning, a vote dump of 149,772 votes came in unexpectedly. We were winning by a lot. The batch was received in horror. Nobody knows anything about it. It's corrupt. Detroit is corrupt. I have a lot of friends in Detroit. They know it, but Detroit is totally corrupt.
Trump publicly maligned a Philadelphia city commissioner for stating on the news that there was no evidence of widespread fraud in Philadelphia. As a result, the Philadelphia city commissioner and his family received death threats.
The plan began in early December, and ultimately, the conspirators and Trump's campaign took the Wisconsin memo and expanded it to any state that Trump claimed was contested. Even New Mexico, which Trump had lost by more than 10% of the popular vote.
The next day, Trump's campaign filed an election challenge suit in New Mexico at 11:54 a.m., 6 minutes before the noon deadline for the electors' votes, as a pretext so that there was pending litigation there at the time the fraudulent electors voted.
The deputy campaign manager responded, "Here's the thing, the way this is morphed. It's a crazy play, so I don't know who wants to put their name on it."
The vice president responded that he thought there was no constitutional basis for such authority and that it was improper. In response, Trump told the vice president, "You're too honest."
On January 3rd, Trump again told the vice president that at the certification proceeding, the vice president had the absolute right to reject electoral votes and the ability to overturn the election.
Also, on January 4th, when co-conspirator 2 acknowledged to Trump's senior advisor that no court would support his proposal, the senior advisor told co-conspirator 2, "You're going to cause riots in the streets."
Trump remarked to advisors that the crowd the following day on January 6th was going to be angry.
All Vice President Pence has to do is send it back to the states to recertify, and we become president, and you are the happiest people.
Before Trump had finished speaking, a crowd began to gather at the Capitol. Thereafter, a mass of people, including individuals who had traveled to Washington and to the Capitol at Trump's direction, broke through barriers cordoning off the Capitol grounds and advanced on the building.
Members of the crowds chanted, "Hang Mike Pence! Where is Pence? Bring him out! And Traitor Pence!"
At 3:41 a.m. on January 7th, as President of the Senate, the Vice President announced the certified results of the 2020 presidential election in favor of Biden.
From on or about November 14, 2020 through on or about January 20, 2021 in the District of Columbia and elsewhere, Donald J. Trump did knowingly combine, conspire, confederate, and agree with co-conspirators, known and unknown to the grand jury, to injure, oppress, threaten, and intimidate one or more persons in the free exercise and enjoyment of a right and privilege secured to them by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, that is, the right to vote and to have one's vote counted, in violation of Title 18, United States Code 241, a true bill, signed Jack Smith, Special Counsel, United States Department of Justice.
So that's a small sample of the 83 readers, and that was Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon who wrapped up the indictment.
So it's back to you, Robert.
Okay, Roberta, thanks.
Thank
And
you.
our first panel has two members, and they're quite a pair. First, Ray Suarez is an accomplished and widely admired broadcast journalist. He spent years at NPR, at PBS, also at Al Jazeera. He has taught at NYU Shanghai, as well as at Amherst College. Among the podcasts and radio shows that he's involved in, Ray hosts On Shifting Ground for KQED-FM. Ray, it's good to see you once again.
Great to be with you, Robert.
And your fellow panelist is Norm Ornstein, who's one of Washington's foremost analysts of the Congress and more generally of our politics. Norm is a political scientist who has written several books about how Washington works and how it doesn't work. He is an emeritus scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, which is a typically conservative Washington think tank. Norm, it's always good to see you.
Great to see you too, as always, Robert.
And Norm, I'd like to turn to you first to just give us some context here in terms of where we stand with this indictment. When is there a trial? What stands in the way of there being a trial? What role might the Supreme Court have in there being a trial or not? Where are we?
Sure, Robert. I do want to say for those who came in a little bit late, this started with Roberta Baskin and Jim Trengrove reading the indictment to each other in bed.
I know.
I've heard some creative forms of foreplay, but
Very
this
romantic.
one's got to be the hottest yet.
Yeah.
So here's what we know, Robert. This trial was originally scheduled for March. The indictment is extensive, as we have seen, but it's also very targeted with the one defendant for a trial that would have basically 4 explosive charges against Trump. But it is now a little bit in abeyance. And the reason at this point is because Trump has argued that he has absolute immunity as a president from, and as an ex-president, from any actions, even if they are, as he said, over the line. This has gone before a panel of the DC Circuit. The 3 judges there seemed, shall we say, highly skeptical of that argument when it was heard. But we have not yet had a ruling from them that would have it expedited potentially to the full DC Circuit and then to the Supreme Court. And until we get that resolved, and of course, also lurking in the background is states, Colorado and Maine, that have argued that under the 14th Amendment, Trump can be removed from the ballot, which would have another impact, not on this indictment and trial, but more broadly on Trump's prospects in the future. At this point, this should move relatively quickly. It is hard to imagine even this Supreme Court saying that Trump has immunity and therefore the indictment can be scotched. But we're probably not looking at a trial until May, perhaps, or June at this stage, and a trial that some expect might last for up to 3 months.
Ray Suarez, that trial will be, to put it mildly, the biggest news event of in some time, and certainly the biggest that I assume will not be either on radio or television. What is all this? What is this season doing for journalism in America? And how has this case or the Trump administration generally, do you think, affected American journalism?
Well, this comes at a time where American journalism is plunging in public trust and credibility to a multi-decade low. It's a very dangerous thing for a working democracy. And of course, it's dangerous for the business you and I gave our adult lives to. But it's more fundamental than that. We also come to this valley in Americans' trust of the news business at the same time as there is a wide array of politicians ready to destroy public trust in operating institutions like the courts, like the American Academy, like the justice system, so that taking the indictment like this and bringing it down from the mountaintop and instead making it something that comes out of the mouths of regular people is tremendously valuable. Takes us out of the equation a little bit. For years, part of the job of covering trials, covering high-profile arrests, was to quickly run up to a clerk or a recorder's office, get a Xeroxed copy of the indictment, quickly read it before going live on the air. Well, we're not really the channel for those messages, the trusted channel for those messages in the way that we used to be. So having regular people own that indictment is a really, really important thing, given where we are right now.
I'd like to hear from both of you about the political context of all this during a campaign year. People have an economy to be concerned about, even though unemployment is relatively low and inflation seems to be largely tamed. They have concerns about abortion, about wars in Ukraine and Gaza, many, many things. Do we think that Trump's legal situation is going to break through and figure as a major concern for Americans when they've got, frankly, so much else on their plate?
Let me first respond to that, Robert, by saying, to follow on what Ray said, as I've been watching news and reading from a wide array of sources, everything now is about the horse race, which is where journalists are comfortable. Who's up, who's down, and they're treating this like a normal election. And I think most Americans have not focused on Donald Trump, what he did, much less what he has openly said he plans to do if he gets elected again as president. We need to get the focus on the direct threat, the existential threat to our democracy, and to cut through some of those concerns. They're very important concerns. But this is not a typical election where it's looking at one candidate's and party's policy positions arrayed against another candidate's and policy positions, at least not alone. What we're looking at is a presidential candidate facing not just this indictment, but a series of other trials involving the widest array of charges of corruption. We've already had him basically seen by a jury as having raped E. Jean Carroll. We know that he stole documents and obstructed justice in Florida, that he tried to overturn the election in Georgia. And we need a focus on this as well as on what he would do. And that's why having this out there and getting people focused less on inflation and more on the threat to all of our lives becomes so important.
Ray, your thoughts on this?
As the presidential campaign itself picks up steam and comes more into focus on people who don't think of themselves as political or particularly involved, the spectacle of the president of the former president of the United States, flying from city to city to city to be in the dock week after week. Right now, it's an abstraction. Yeah, he showed up a couple of days in the E. Jean Carroll matter in New York, but soon there'll be really, really damning and in some cases shocking testimony coming out of courtrooms elsewhere in the country. And I'll be interested to see how people react. I think it'll make it real in a way that it hasn't become yet.
I have a question for both of you. We'll start with first with Norman. Listening to the indictment, does the special prosecutor have, to use the old phrase, the smoking gun? That is, does he have Donald Trump saying something, not just to Mike Pence, you're too honest, or which implies something? Is it absolutely clear to any jury that Donald Trump knew that he'd lost the election in 2020? Or can he say, yeah, I know the White House staff told me that I lost, the White House counsel told me I lost, the Attorney General told me I lost, the head of national security, the chief internet guy at DHS told me I lost. I thought I won. I don't believe those guys. Norman, is there enough there to lead a jury that's reasoning to a standard of reasonable doubt to say he must have known, he must have understood that?
There are two components here, Robert. The first is the question of whether he knew, and on the basis of testimony from people who were there in the room with him, there are lots of reasons to believe that he knew. Now, is there enough smoke out there that might raise questions? Perhaps yes. But frankly, that's not the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that Donald Trump deeply believed that he had won and the election had been stolen. The question is whether he has the right to incite a violent insurrection. And there, what we know from a lot of evidence already out there, but we also know that Jack Smith has a lot more. He has gotten access to phone records. We don't know exactly what's there, but there is every reason to believe, from what we've heard from Cassidy Hutchinson and other aides close to Donald Trump, that he was deeply involved in orchestrating all of this. And we know from the physical evidence that he sat there in the room watching television while aides and family members pleaded with him as violence was taking place. People were being killed, that he resisted doing anything until it was clear that this was not going to prevail at the Capitol. So I think the evidence from the indictment, but what we also know otherwise, is pretty overwhelming.
Ray, I want to hear the short version of your answer, because then we have a quick question that's been submitted.
I'd urge everybody who's come to this event to watch the complete indictment, whether it's a couple of sittings or one, depending on your appetite. What Jack Smith has done, and his collaborators, is put together what we call in the news business often the TikTok, a chronology of events that fit together like pieces in a puzzle and take us from moment to moment to moment. Who said what? Who did what? Now, I know that the president is planning on instructing his lawyers to go into a courtroom and say that if it was his opinion that he really won, that there's nothing corrupt about him trying to reclaim the mantle of president. But what the indictment says, and as you'll hear when you listen to it, it's something much more than that. There is no such thing as an opinion that can make committing a crime okay. And that's where his troubles start.
And one quick short question just to Norm before we move on. One of our viewers asked, why are you so confident that this trial will take place before the election? What are the odds of it happening after the election, conceivably after Donald Trump's election?
So I'm not confident that we will have a trial in Florida before the election because, to be blunt and frank, Judge Eileen Cannon is the most valuable part of Trump's legal team.
This is the documents case. This is the classified documents case.
The judge in Washington is a no-nonsense judge who wants to move this along, who understands the stakes, but also, by every standard, we have a Speedy Trial Act, it should move forward. And the only roadblock that I would see here is if somehow, and it would boggle the mind, this Supreme Court would say Trump and presidents have absolute immunity. And remember, one of the questions in the appeals court hearing was, so if Trump as president went to SEAL Team 6 and said, I order you to assassinate one of your political opponents, would that be included in immunity? And his lawyers said, yes, the only way you could prosecute him is if first the House and Senate impeached and convicted him. Of course, the follow-up question to that would be, well, what if he then ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate members of Congress who would impeach and convict him? And so it's impossible to imagine that that would happen. The timing may be delayed. It could happen in June or even a little bit later, but I'm very confident we will have a trial before the election.
Norm, you've inspired me by talking about a no-nonsense judge who's moving things along. So I'm going to move things along right now. And thank you and Ray Suarez. It's great to see both of you and enlightening to hear both of you. So
thank you.
Thanks. Our second group of panelists is just as impressive as the first. You just haven't heard of them yet. They are all college students. And like Norman Ray, they are all readers in the recording of the indictment, Julia Lewis, Abby Garber, and Seferino Dorr. Seferino, who was born and raised in Buffalo, has roots in South Sudan. He is a political science major at Fort Valley State University, where he's president of the senior class and also a volleyball player and president of the Political Science Students Association. Julia Lewis is a student at American University in Washington, D.C., and an intern at Climate Cabinet. Back home in Houston, she was executive director of the Houston Youth Climate Strike that entailed backing activities in support of climate action. And our third panelist, Abby Garber, is a member of the Wellesley class of 2027, but her roots are in rural Virginia. At age 11, she joined the Rockingham County Democratic Party and has been involved in Young Democrats and political campaigns ever since. Rockingham County is in the Shenandoah Valley. Welcome to all three of you. And Abby, I think that people from my part of Virginia, just across the river from Washington, I don't think we need visas anymore to go to the Shenandoah Valley, but it is all in the same Commonwealth. The three of you are very engaged young adults trying to make this country more democratic. And I'd like to hear from each of you, starting with Abby and then Julia and then Seferino, to answer two questions for me. First, how important is this indictment that we all just read from in your view? And second, what if you had to explain to your elders what we may not understand about organizing, talking politics with, getting to the vote, young voters, your contemporaries, what would you tell us older folks we ought to understand? Abby.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Robert, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight. And I want to thank Roberta and Jim as well for inviting us young speakers. It is so important to elevate the youth voice in this conversation, as we are the ones that are going to have to face the brunt of this election the most. To your first question, Robert, how important this indictment is. Well, honestly, I think for young voters, how important it is varies on how well we message around it. I think young voters are sick and tired of constantly hearing about how bad our political landscape is. I feel like I turn on the news every day and I just get sad. And I love the news. And so that's really saying something. And so I feel like the importance of this indictment rests on how we talk about it. And I love how we're talking about it today, talking about how it's going to impact ordinary people. And what young voters want to hear is, yes, this indictment is important, but what are we actually going to do about it? One of the most important ways to connect with young voters, and this ties into your second question, is policy-based messaging. Young voters have lived their entire lives in an era such as this one with Trump, where our country has faced tons of hardships. And so what we want to hear is what they're going to do about it. So we'll hear this indictment, but we're going to say yes and what's next? And what are you guys going to change about this? And what are we going to do about this? Because I hear this indictment, but in the back of my head, I'm also thinking about abortion access and climate change and student loan debt. This indictment is crucial, but we need to do more. Okay. And so that ties into the second question. And I'm sorry if it's a little loud. I do unfortunately go to college, and so it's hard to find a private space. But I think one of the most important things to understand about connecting with young voters is that we must meet young voters where they are. So go to college campuses, go to high schools, go to wherever in your community young people are found. I know in my community, there are tons downtown, but there are also tons at the livestock sales. So figure out where in your community are young people congregating and go to them. But you also need to go to them with other young people, because young people know how to organize other young people best. And when stuff goes wrong, is when older folks try to come in and they are very well-intentioned and very well-meaning, but young voters hear when older folks are telling everything that we're going to do to change, they can hear that as condescending. And so we need to have younger folks be the one to organize other young folks. And then that brings me to my final point, is that when we talk about the importance of young voters, we also need to give them genuine leadership opportunities. I hear all the time how important I am, but then when I actually try to engage in a leadership role in a predominantly older setting, I constantly get turned down because I'm inexperienced, when I just know that isn't true. So we need to actually value young people beyond just their vote. There's more to young people than the little tally mark next to the Democratic name, and that needs to be amplified.
Very well said. And thank you for that. And Julia, the question to you is, first, how important is this indictment? And what do we need to know? What do we older folks need to know about young people in politics?
Yeah, thank you so much, Robert. And I first want to say I just really, really resonate with what Abby said, everything that she said. Particularly the reason that this indictment is so important for young people is, as she mentioned, like, this is our future, and this is going to determine the political atmosphere for the rest of our lives. What is going to happen if Trump wins a second term? I was 12 years old when Donald Trump was first elected, and it was one of those moments where I was young, but I remember exactly where I was, what I was doing at that time. And I knew it was bad, but I was too young to realize just how tragic his presidency would be and how far-reaching it would be across our country and in my own life. I'm a young woman of color. I grew up in Houston, Texas, where I no longer have the right to receive certain life-saving medical procedures that have saved the lives of incredible and important women in my own life. I've lived through devastating flooding and droughts in Houston that President Trump actively ignored and denied the root of. My voting rights are under attack, and my right to a holistic education. I don't have to go on and tell you guys all of this, you all know. But something that really struck me, and one of the reasons that I found it really important to participate in this project, is I feel like since that night that he was elected, President Trump has become somewhat of a joke, and not in the typical sense where we're like, oh, haha, you're funny, but in that he has broken conventions so many times that nothing seems to surprise us anymore. We all know January 6th was absolutely horrific, but I think a lot of us saw those sentiments and tensions building for 4 years, and it wasn't necessarily surprising that that's how it culminated. And that is an extreme example, but I've found that, and Norman kind of touched on this as well, that a lot of people in the general public didn't often realize the gravity of what President Trump was doing because we got so numb to it by the end of those 4 years. Norman's mentioned people are treating this as a normal election, and it's not. And so that's kind of why I think it's so important. The indictment is so important for young people, is we need to understand the gravity of what's happening and the threat that our country and our democracy are facing. In terms of how we can empower young people and reach people during this time, from the perspective of a young person, and to be quite frank, the reason that a lot of young people don't vote or feel hopeless is because everything does feel hopeless, like Abby mentioned, when we turn on the news, and everyone is telling us that it's our generation's job to fix it. And I've heard this all the time, and objectively it is true. But when you're hearing it over and over again, and in the back of your mind, we know that we're going to have to take out so many loans just to get through college. And when we graduate, we're going to have to live with 1 million roommates just to pay rent. And I could go on and on. It's very hard to feel like your vote means something, or that there's a purpose in getting involved and in caring, because sometimes it just feels like, what can I even do, you know? And I organized for 4 years in high school, and I did get burnt out because it was one loss after another. And kind of as I've taken a step back, and I've been reflecting a lot over the past year, and kind of what I have realized is that we have to lead with hope. And when we reach out to the younger generation and have these conversations, it has to be from hope. At the end of the day, people who organize, everyone who's on this Zoom, we're doing what we're doing out of radical love. We're doing it out of love for our communities, out of love for our families, out of love for our country and the people that we care about. That's why we're organizing. And so in order to help young people get engaged and to get young people to vote, you have to show them why they care. what issue is on the table that will impact them? If they aren't being impacted, who do they care about that is going to be impacted? And show them specifically why their vote is important. In my job right now, I track elections in small cities that are decided by 10 votes. And in those situations, your vote matters so much. And I think that's a key way to reach people. Something that Abby said that really struck me was getting young people in leadership positions. I was often in the room with people who wanted to tout the fact they were working with youth, but didn't actually care what I had to say, or because I was a young girl, my opinion didn't matter, or I was uneducated and things like that. And then the last thing that I just wanted to touch on briefly is education. Something that we did a lot at Houston Youth Climate Strike in terms of getting out the vote was literally teaching young people how to vote. A lot of the kids we worked with were first generation, and so their parents didn't vote. They didn't have that experience of going to the polling location and watching, how the boxes worked and things like that. So meeting young people where they are, like Abby said, and providing the resources that will enable them to be involved and enable them to care and have hope at the end of the day.
Julia, thank you. And Seferino, you're up third on this question. How important is the indictment? How should we be reaching young people?
Thank you, Rob, for having us on here. The importance of the indictment, I think, as they were saying in the first panel, it really shows a breakdown in democracy and an attempt at breaking down the democratic values that we build our country upon. And it also shows where our parties currently stand, especially with the GOP with Trump having such a hold on the GOP. And that was exemplified in the January 6th insurrection. So it really begs the question, who can be above the law, especially in a presidential election. There's a lot at stake. Democracy is at stake. So the danger to our democracy is very, very clear. We read the indictment and put voice to it. And it brings up a very big question about the precedent of what could happen if someone is elected while they're going through an indictment, possibly through a trial. And especially given what Donald Trump has said he would do if he is to be elected. It's a very important time in our history and in our legal history as a country. And on the question of reaching youth voters, I think it's important to understand that youth voters are very value driven. And a lot of youth voters can become apathetic when we see that we have to choose between candidates who do not have the best morals and do not represent the country to the standard that we would like them to, especially seeing during Donald Trump's presidency, almost every morning it was a headline about something that he said or a new act that he passed that was preventing immigrants from entering the country or taking away abortion rights. But as the other two panelists were saying, I think it's important to meet youth voters where they are. It's important to allow them to feel heard and hear their concerns. What we've been doing on our campus at Fort Valley is conveying the importance of voting through pushing registration to vote for municipal elections, showing that, although the presidential elections are usually the ones that most people vote in, we can also have a big impact at the local level by electing officials that can make more immediate changes that we can see. And then as we continue to grasp that importance, it'll trickle upwards, hopefully, to seeing people vote in midterm elections, and an even greater turn on presidential elections by voter block.
I've been seeing, as the three of you were talking, various messages from chat room applauding what they're hearing from you. I just wanted to check back with Roberta and Jim for half a minute if there's anything in particular they wanted to bring to our attention.
Are we in? Yeah, I'm passionate about the youth vote and want to work with them, not at them, and worry that this could be the last election, that instead of having an election about two old white guys, if we could focus more on democracy versus autocracy or fascism. But I have hope with my sleeves rolled up, and will go where young people tell me to go.
Yeah, and I the three students who we have on, I'm so grateful to you, and touching on different aspects of the youth vote. Maybe those who are disaffected don't believe their vote counts. how few people vote in rural areas and how important it is to get out the vote in rural areas. And then the climate crisis. I mean, arguably there's no greater issue than that.
Democracy and climate are inextricably linked together.
Well, thanks, and thanks to our three college students, to Seferino and Julia and Abby for being so articulate and contributing to this discussion. Our three final panelists are all activists. They're all working in various ways to strengthen and broaden our democracy and to get more Americans engaged in the political process. Khadija Kenner is Chief Executive Officer of the New Pennsylvania Project. The project's objective is to expand Pennsylvania's electorate so that it reflects the demographic, the changing demographic of the state, and that means registering people and working with people, often in communities of color and in immigrant communities. Denora Getachew is CEO of Do Something, which is an NEO that works at empowering young people to change the world. She's worked on local democracy at, among other places, the New York City Council, NYU Law School's Brennan Center, and the nonpartisan good government group Citizens Union. And Haley Bush is founder and executive director of Donor Organizer Hub. Its mission is to recruit, train, and support donor organizers who are bringing resources to progressive causes. Thanks to the three of you for coming. It's good to see you. And let me ask Haley first to explain what the Donor Organizer Hub is, because it's not a set of words I'm entirely familiar with, and then we'll go on to the issues at hand.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. And I'll keep this one short and sweet. Donor Organizer Hub, we are focused on inviting people to join our movements by training and coaching everyday people to fundraise for progressive groups. And so we think of donations as that first step to get people in the door. And then we build leaders to host house parties, host bake sales, anything that can bring a little bit of fun and joy, but also resources to our movement.
Okay. And Denora, what are young people doing? What are you trying to get young people doing when you say do something?
I was going to say, we're trying to get them to do something. And thank you so much to Roberta and Jim for having me to be a part of this important conversation, because this isn't just about, as the panelists right before this spoke about, this isn't just about who's on the ballot as much as it is about democracies on the ballot. And I share Roberta's concern about young people and their willingness to participate and vote in light of the alarming statistics we see that young people don't actually trust their elected leaders to do what's right. Do Something is the 30-year-old hub for young people in activism. We meet young people where they are. We want them to find ways to get involved in their communities in ways big and small, and then literally get out there and do something. And that starts with a simple action, volunteer-based often, donating to a local food pantry, collecting clothes and upcycling them to help those in need, but increasingly levels up to larger activism, because what we're seeing from Gen Z and Gen Alpha. So Gen Alpha, in case you don't know them, the young people coming of age right now is 13-year-olds. I have a Gen Alpha young person in my house. She's not here right now, thank goodness, because she might find this conversation a little cringy, in her own words. But the reality is they're coming of age in the midst of, or on the heels of, a global pandemic. While we navigate an intersectional reckoning for equity and justice, there's the climate crisis, there's economic uncertainty, and they are bearing the burden of all of that simultaneously in real time on social media and technology. And so our work at Do Something is to make that digestible, demystify democracy for them, and then give them small ways to get engaged so that we can start developing their civic commitment.
Thank you for that. I want to turn now to Khadija Kenner. Pennsylvania is often said by political reporters to be the state consists of Philadelphia on one side, Pittsburgh on the other, and Alabama between them. There's a lot of rural voters in Pennsylvania. Are you finding making any connection with them, or is it mostly in the big cities of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I'll say this on behalf of Pennsylvanians, we don't care for that analogy too much anymore here in Pennsylvania, because Right now, in this moment, the growing population throughout the entire Commonwealth, if that's rural, urban, suburban, exurban, it is communities of color that are growing population in Pennsylvania. So you're going to find communities of color sprinkled out all of Pennsylvania in this moment, and we are engaging all of those. And the messaging is the same. How we speak to folks in rural Pennsylvania is the same as how we're going to speak to them in suburban Pennsylvania, because they're all suffering from the same inflictions in this moment. And so the messaging is very similar when we're speaking to those constituents.
Seems to me that we've heard both from Jim and Roberta, and also from Norm, our panelists, how unusual this election is. The great error would be to mistake it for an ordinary election, although people under a certain age in America, I don't know if they've experienced any normal elections. It's they are the rarity. My question that I want to hear from all three of you is, when you actually talk to people, when you talk to people about political engagement, do you have to tell them that this is an extremely important, unusual election, or do they tell that to you? Do you hear that back from them? Why don't we start with you, Khadija?
Yeah, they don't have to explain it to us, or we don't need to explain it to them, because they're living it. And so they really understand what is happening. It's all they've known. And I think what is happening in the messaging that comes out in this moment, it's kind of working. It is creating voter apathy. Experiencing that in Pennsylvania, where folks are really feeling like their vote doesn't matter in this moment. Not that it doesn't count, but that it doesn't matter because they are not seeing their needs being met. Or if the needs are being met, it's not being properly communicated with those who are actually meeting those needs. Mm-hmm. And so in this moment, what we're seeing with young folks in particular is that we're just trying to speak to, what it is they're concerned about. And you've heard that from them earlier tonight, what they're concerned about. And so they're the trusted messengers. And I think what's great about what we're doing here in Pennsylvania is that we're hiring folks who come from the community to address their own community, because they are the trusted messenger, and they're the ones that are going to actually get this voter apathy, away here in 2024, because we're going to need everybody to come out and cast a ballot, and we're going to need record turnout.
Dinora, in your work with young people, do you hear them telling you that they understand that this is a really important election, and unusually so, or are you telling them this is a really important election? You should be more engaged in this.
The reality is we can't tell young people, right? They have power and they know it. And so they're telling us. They know it's an important election. They know what issues are on the ballot. I was so wowed by the panel right before this, because they're talking about those top issues: student debt crisis, reproductive access, the clarity around economic certainty, and will there be livable jobs for the short term and the future, among other issues, right? Safety and well-being, mental health crisis at scale. What I'm concerned about is not what young people know or don't know. This narrative is forming that I think is really dangerous, that young people aren't going to turn out to vote. The data shows the exact opposite. Over the last 3 election cycles, the number of young people who've turned out to vote has not even gradually, steadily increased. And this year, there are 7 million new eligible young voters who will vote for the first time. I want to talk about how do we use all the tools in our toolbox to get them to come out to vote and know what's at stake. Not because they won't do it already, but we're actually, to Khadija's point, spreading this conversation about apathy when young people understand what's at stake and they want to make their voices heard. And what we should be doing is think about how to modernize our elections, make them accessible to all Americans, and make sure that people turn out to vote, not in ways that feel transactional. So don't come knock on my door for the first time right before the election and never come back, but actually, as I like to say, engage young people in the full contact sport that is democracy. By 2028, we expect that young voters will make up the majority of our electorate. I say that as a proud Gen Xer. That means that their voice really matters, and we need to be making sure that we're doing all we can to equip them to claim our democracy. What's not going to equip them to claim our democracy is when we don't hold elected leaders accountable and make sure that the integrity of our democracy continues to stand.
As you were speaking, I saw a message come up from a listener, Patrick, who said when he heard about people whose needs are not being met, who feel that politicians aren't listening to them, he said that's the recipe that Donald Trump got elected on, appealing to people who felt that their needs were not being met and that nobody listened to them if you didn't live on a coast or in a big metropolitan area. Are you at all concerned about well, about demagogues who might take advantage of young people and their despair over things.
Was that directed at me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I absolutely am, right? And I think we are in a very polarizing moment in our society, and I think much more has to be done to leverage the power that technology holds for us to actually dispel misinformation and disinformation that's happening online and create these silos that make it easier for demagogues to grab hold of our electorate and perpetuate certain views. This is important work that all of us should be doing to make clear what is on the ballot, who's on the ballot, what's at stake, but also doing the important work of bringing us together as opposed to dividing us. And young people, I just want to be transparent, at least from my work at Do Something, young people see what's happening, right? And this is why we are also facing a mental health crisis with young people in particular, or even at scale, because they see what's happening and they don't always know how to turn away from it because they want to know what's happening, right? They actually want to be informed, they want to participate, they want to be engaged. I think we all have to do our part as well to hold those voices accountable that are engaging in demagoguery and that are hoping and seeking to divide us, not on the merits, but actually on falsehoods.
Thank you very much for that. And Haley Bash, let me put the question to you. Do you hear from the people whom you work with or younger people a general sense of extreme urgency about the election this year? Or do you hear more boredom with another election between perhaps two very familiar faces?
I don't think any young person has the privilege of boredom. And I'm a 30-something, so I'm creeping into the out of youngster territory, but
No,
if we're giving
you're
the
still young.
honorary
You're
vote
still young,
here.
yes.
You know, most of my friends are, you know, deep in the student debt crisis. Like, you know, they are living in states where they don't have access to critical medical care that they need. It's not a question, and I think my fellow panelists, Kadita and Denora, said it perfectly. You know, it's not about them not knowing, them not seeing the urgency. It really is this piece. And Julia from the last panel put it so perfectly. It's not just getting about the issues, it's getting to, you know, who do they know that's impacted by these issues, and how can we together think about ways to hold people in power accountable so that we can see the solutions that our communities need. You know, so much, I think, and Denora, you said this so beautifully, like the mental health crisis is so tied into this. That's where that I'm seeing in my work, and I would love to hear from the two of you further. That's where a lot of the sort of, I am just so overwhelmed. I go on social media, it's doomsday scrolling. You know, I hear from my parents how important the election is, blah, blah, and it's all on me. It's all on my shoulders. And it doesn't have to be that way, right? Like, it could be as simple as reaching out to a couple friends and say, like, let's start a group thread. Let's talk about different, you know, things that we're kind of seeing popping up. We can show up to this phone bank. Oh, there's this neighborhood cleanup thing that's happening, whatever it is, just to start feeling togetherness. Because otherwise it becomes this big old chore. If it's all on you, you individual young person, you have to not only vote, but you're going to, you know, fix everything that basically prior generations, you know, kind of millennials included, you know, were part of the problem with. And so we kind of have to flip that script a bit and say, no, 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 we're doing this together, not alone.
I'm always struck. You say you're 30. What people my age should remember is what you have experienced in your lifetime, which is 9/11, which is a terrible economic recession, a pandemic that forced isolation upon people like nothing else we'd experienced in decades. The strange presidential election or elections that we have had. It's been you're not people. I don't think it makes sense for us to tell you about how great things used to be and how much worse they are now. I guess that's not a very encouraging message. But hearing you and hearing your fellow panelists is very inspiring, and I want to thank you for taking part, and thank Denora and Kadita as well. Thanks, you guys are great.
I'm so inspired by all of you. I hope the young people will run for office. I hope the young people will put us older folks to work on this election. And I hope, and I'm grateful to everyone who's in these little boxes, and grateful to the 83 people who read the indictment and took it so seriously as a sense of civic duty.
Robert, final thoughts?
You know, my thoughts are, I had a very similar reaction to Norm's to reading the indictment and listening to the entire thing this morning, actually, which was that the events, the assault on the Capitol seemed so unspontaneous to me after reading the entire indictment. It was virtually the fallback plan. All of the more sophisticated ideas they had for thwarting the election result didn't work out, and so we got this instead. But I was struck by how well Jack Smith pieced together what I think Ray called the tick-tock. And it may not be the most encouraging story about our country that this happened, but it's certainly a challenge to all of us to take very seriously. And even if somehow there's a political result that moots Donald Trump, there's an issue there that has to be addressed. I was quite struck by listening. I wasn't in bed with my wife at the time, but I was very struck by reading the indictment. Thank you very much for inviting me to do this.
Yeah, we watched it in bed
And we watched it in bed,
Yeah.
and it was riveting. And I hope all of you will watch it.
Yeah. Let me just say before, Robert, thank you for your time and your attention for this. It's nice working with you. Appreciate it. And an opportunity now to say thank you to all the readers, those on the program tonight and those in the audience. You know, when we started this, as we started to accrue voices and faces, I started seeing the We Are the World concert video and, you know, sort of the We Are the World of politics. So I'm going to get back to all of you now because we're going to sing the indictment next time. And as we go from there. But thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you to the audience. Great turnout.
Yeah.
And I want to turn it now over to our fearless leader, Ed Cohen, for some thoughts on. Oh, I should say also, I just put it in the chat, for those of you who came late and didn't see the highlight reel right at the beginning, it's in the chat right now.
You have to hit
And okay, there it goes. And so you can look at the 5 minute 45 seconds. In a few minutes, the entire full indictment will be up. Toss it over to Ed. Thank you.
Jim and Roberta, thank you, and thanks for the extraordinary video that you've produced with unbelievable creativity and compassion. And Robert Siegel, you just brought to us tonight your normal, thoughtful, and probative way of handling a very important discussion, and thank you. And of course to Norm Ornstein and Ray Suarez, as well as Julia, Abby, Seferino, Kadita, Denora, and Haley. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and for participating in the panel. So now what? You know, we've heard, and I think all of you know, that this is a challenging time for us. And the fact that you're here tonight is an indication that you already know what's at stake. So the question is, what now? As an organization, we're committed to trying to help our network engage and find ways to be constructive and instead of wringing our hands, doing something. And so we've got a couple ideas for you that we're going to be putting out there over the next year. The first is contributions. And I know that nobody likes to hear the pitch, but I think that Candida and Denora said it best when they said, we got to get out, get boots on the ground, and we've got to do it now because they don't want to be asked in November to vote. Organizing takes a long time. It's a lot of effort. It's a matter of creating relationships. And that's what these groups and other groups that I'm going to tell you about in a moment do. And they need the money now. You don't hire the person in October. You don't get the money in October. You get the money now, or else it isn't going to work and it's going to be too late. So one of the things that our group does is to vet groups to see which ones in target states are the ones that we think will make the most difference and will be a good bang for your buck. If you go to our website, partnersfordemocracy.com, or .org, either one, and the URL is on the screen. And you'll see a list of groups that we have thoroughly vetted in target states
that are doing exactly what we've just talked about. And we're going to be adding others as the year progresses, because there are lots of groups doing this. Many of them are deserving of money, but they got to get started. So if you're going to write a check for this purpose, this is the time to do it. The second thing you can do is to volunteer. And there are lots of ways of volunteering, and we're going to help you volunteer. When you go to our website, starting in about a week, there's a link for volunteering. And there are going to be all kinds of opportunities for postcarding, for phone calls, for canvassing, for texting, for whatever you want to do, and wherever you want to do it. And if you're not in a position to write a check, and I understand a lot of people are not, this is another way you can make a difference. And we're going to be refreshing that volunteer opportunity site regularly. So please, over the course of the year, take a look, see if there's another way you might want to get involved. We're going to continue having special events on a monthly basis as the year progresses. We're going to look for compelling topics with compelling people to talk about them, who will offer their insights about the election, the issues, how things are going, what needs to be done. Watch your emails, because we'll be announcing these as they come. And the most important thing we need to do right now, in addition to the things that I've mentioned, is we need to build our network. The more people that we have watching these videos, being exposed to these wonderful, wonderful groups that are out doing terrific things, to candidates that we're going to identify as worthy for contributions and in need of contributions as the year progresses, the more money we'll be able to raise for them. This group, our organization, Partners for Democracy, is a network of networks vision. In other words, I took my list of friends and family and I sent them these emails, and I asked them to do the same. And I asked the people they sent it to do the same. And we've built a pretty good network, but it needs to be bigger. So the one thing that I ask of you now, you can do it tonight, is identify 2 or 3 people, that's it, 2 or 3 people in your mailing list who you think would benefit from hearing about the kinds of things that we're presenting, seeing this video, knowing how to make smart contributions, and sending them our emails. It's that simple. We need to build our group. We need to build our base. We need to organize. So with that very mild, low-key, and unsubtle pitch, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And again, Jim mentioned that the entire video is up on partnersfordemocracy.com. If you want to see the whole thing in entirety or in bits, and I recommend it. And with that, thank you and good night.